Emma Frost, you previously adapted three of Philippa Gregory's novels into a single miniseries, but this time you only adapted one. Why did you do that?
It was just to do with the way the stories worked. We were finding the format with the first season, and Philippa writes in a way that each of her books is from a single first-person narrative. So she has just one character, and she's inside the head of that one character, which is great for a novel. It's harder for a TV show. So when I first read The White Queen, it became really clear that the series of books she was writing would need to be part of that show to create a TV format. So for the first season, we took The White Queen, which is about Elizabeth Woodville, The Red Queen, which is Margaret Beaufort, and The Kingmaker's Daughter, which is about Anne and Isabel Neville, Warwick's daughters. And it just seemed that the narrative that unfolded in that chunk of history and in those books, those three sides were necessary to really properly tell the story. With The White Princess, it was a little bit different. The Civil War in England is ostensibly over by the time of The White Princess, and the battle has moved into the actual marriage between Lizzie and Henry. So the drama within that one story was enough for the TV series, but also that book implied other pieces of narrative. So in the book, Philippa talks about Burgundy, how the forces against Henry VII all amass in Burgundy. So we reached beyond what was actually in the book, but it was all implied by the one book. So we didn't need to go any further than one novel as the source material.
And why did you make this more standalone instead of calling it like The White Queen Season 2 and maybe bring some of the cast back?
The White Queen was always planned as a limited series. And the reality is that most of the characters in The White Queen are dead by the end of it. So we didn't plan at that point to go any further, but also The White Queen as a TV show covered 21 years. So the characters who were actually still alive by the end of that season, we had to age the actors up quite considerably to play their parts in the last block of The White Queen. So when we then did decide to do The White Princess, there were only 2 or 3 characters that have survived. And if we were to start that with characters already quite considerably aged up, we would then have to age them a further 14 years across the show The White Princess. So it made sense all around if we recast it from the beginning. And also big parts became small parts became big parts, because we're focusing on different stories, different characters and different parts of the narrative. So you have to cast accordingly and make sure that you're choosing the actor in an age appropriate and role appropriate way.
And that's why you can get people like Essie Davis, who you didn't have before.
Exactly.
Yeah. In the last few years, Game of Thrones was on kind of before your first show came out. The White Queen. And then since then, it's gotten much bigger. Did you feel any pressure, like because that's so big, to, I don't know, make things grittier, more salacious?
The short answer to that is no. Philippa wrote the first 3 of these books before Game of Thrones existed as a TV show. And obviously Game of Thrones and Philippa's series of novels, they're all based on the same period of British history. So there are necessarily similarities, as you point out. I have watched very little of Game of Thrones on purpose because when I was doing The White Queen, I just didn't want to be distracted. And I didn't want, if there was a piece of story that they'd gone with, which was very close to the history of the Wars of the Roses, I didn't want to feel like we can't go there because Game of Thrones has, or they've done it this way, we have to do it differently. So I deliberately stayed away and focused on the integrity of our own show and what worked for our own show. And then, in fact, after The White Queen, we started to develop The White Princess quite early, even though it's taken us a few years to get it to the screen, largely to do with my own availability. So I still stayed away from Game of Thrones because I didn't want to be distracted or influenced again moving forward. So, I mean, what I know of Game of Thrones, and I've watched some now, is it's a fantastic show, and quite understandably, that is based on the same period of history. It's an incredibly exciting, thrilling period of history. So it's no surprise that more than one novelist has chosen to look there for source material. So I think the 2 shows complement each other. I mean, I think we are very much a female-driven show. And I know a lot of fans of Game of Thrones have sent me messages on social media saying it feels like a fantastic female counterpart to that show. So I'm quite happy, and I think the two coexist very nicely with each other.
And speaking of it being like a female-driven show, how do you feel about how, like these days, whenever you come out with a TV show, then it's kind of, it has to say something? I feel like every review I read of the White Princess says like, oh, this is a show about women. And there are also these other shows that are about women that came out this year. Or I read this review on the AV Club that said that Margaret Beaufort was the Steve Bannon figure of this show. And then maybe it's the other way around.
I haven't read that.
Yeah, so how do you feel about how your fiction has to make a statement now?
There's a lot of different answers to that. I think it is a show about human beings. I think any drama is about the human experience, and it shouldn't really matter too much if the protagonist is male or female. If that person is experiencing human dilemmas, human emotions, and if the show is telling us something about the human experience, women should be able to identify with the male protagonist, and male audience should be able to identify with the female protagonist. The reality is that historically, most protagonists have been male, and the way that characters are constructed is that usually the male character is the human, and female characters are normally constructed as man's other. They're normally there as a trophy to be won, or a problem to be solved, or an enemy to be vanquished. And so when you do have female protagonists, suddenly people comment on it because it is still in the minority. The fact that it's still in the minority is the problem. We're in 2017. We shouldn't still be having this conversation. 50% of the population is female. 50% of the audience is female. Quite often more than 50% of the audience is female. So what frustrates me is just the fact that as soon as you have a female protagonist, people make an assumption that you are making a statement rather than just telling a story. And I really hope that as we continue to evolve as an that whole thing will disappear, and that eventually we will reach a point where 50% of protagonists are female and no one comments.
And this is a historical drama, so tell me about how you incorporated magic.
Yeah, good question. In the period that we cover, magic was simply one belief system alongside any other faith. So there was Christianity, and if you believe in God, then the flip side of that is you believe in the devil. So at the time, there was superstition and there was a belief in magic. Philippa necessarily incorporated that into her novels, far more in The Lady of the Rivers, the book about Jacquetta, and The White Queen, because in fact, in their own lifetime, I mean, Jacquetta, Elizabeth Woodville's mother, was tried as a witch. So these are parts of their own narrative. We had a big conversation about how to incorporate those elements, because it felt that to excise magic would be equivalent to trying to excise religious faith. I mean, this is a world where they both are. So what we tried to do quite consciously was to uncouple cause and effect. So while our characters believe in magic, there is always the possibility, as you watch the drama, that it is a coincidence. So, for example, in The White Queen, there was an attempt to raise a storm, and the storm did indeed come, but we were very careful in the show to make sure we had sound effects of thunder before they even did the spell, so that if you're paying attention, the storm was coming anyway. And in The White Princess, there is a moment where Elizabeth is angry and a statue of the Virgin Mary smashes on the floor, but that's a statue you would have in a chapel. She's angry, she happens to smash it. In the show, we juxtapose that with Mary of Burgundy falling from her horse. But again, that is a coincidence. There is no absolute line linking those to do. Is it wants to test to the fact that the characters in the show would believe in it, but we're not saying it is actually possible. We're not in a world of Harry Potter.
And what is the biggest change that you made from the novels?
There's a lot necessarily. I mean, I referred before to the fact that Philippa's novels each are told from the single point of view of one character. So you're very much in that character's head, in what they're hoping, in what they're fearing, in what they're thinking. Drama is obviously very different to that. You can't get inside the character's head. So as a TV dramatist, I have to find a way to break that open and to externalize all that drama. So it's not just what the character's thinking, but what people are saying to each other. You have to turn it into conflict. You have to turn it into different characters with different points of view so that you can actually tell an external story with action and conflict. The more you dig into that, the more you necessarily have to change the novel, because you have to go down that route and make the story then have its own momentum and make sense. So that is a big part of what you have to change. There are other things that I've changed. Philippa bases her novels on history. Philippa is first and foremost a historian. My job is a little bit different, and I have to triangulate between Philippa's book, which is already, as she says herself, a fiction about a mystery. So her book is a novel, it is a fiction. Then there's history on another point of the triangle, or at least recorded history, what we know about history, which is mostly the story about what white men did. And so by definition, it doesn't really tell us too much about the women in our story. And then the third point of my triangle is a 21st century audience and what they will engage with, how they will connect with and resonate with the story that I'm telling. So when I approach adapting the book, I remain as faithful as I can to the book and to the readers who love those books. But at the same time, I have to look at certain things and how those will play for a 21st century audience. I also have to consider, how did we approach the storytelling in The White Queen? How did we create characters and make sure that those characters have a follow through? So there's a couple of key moments where I've taken a liberty outside of history, but as I say, Philippa's book is a fiction anyway, and I'm in the business of writing fiction. So there are a couple of key occasions where what I've done is entirely me as a dramatist, but I've done it because I believe it's the truth of the characters. It's still a possibility of what could have happened. And one example is the sex scene between Lizzie and Henry in the first episode. History tells us that Lizzie gave birth to her first child 8 months after she married Henry. Unless the child was very premature, that implies premarital sex. So then you go, okay, was that consensual premarital sex? Well, the chances are that it wasn't, for the morality of the time, if nothing else, and the fact that these two were forced together against their wishes. So Philippa has made an absolutely legitimate choice as a novelist that Henry raped Lizzie. I've made a different choice based on that historical information because I don't believe that's something I can or want to show to a 21st century audience. And the show is essentially a love story. It's about how these two people find each other despite the most inauspicious of beginnings to their relationship. I don't believe, nor will I perpetuate an idea that a woman can be raped by a man and then fall in love with him. So the choice I made was to tilt that scene. So I didn't want to shy away from it. I could have decided not to do it at all. But I think it's too pressing an issue in our society. And what I wanted to do was look at how can we play that scene in a way that Lizzie can actually remove Henry's power. So rape, as we know, is about power rather than about sex. And I wanted to look at how can Lizzie in that situation, and women by inference, reclaim some kind of power in that kind of situation. And so Lizzie completely emasculates Henry to the point that he's not going to go through with it. And it's her who then challenges and humiliates with it. So the scene plays in a very different way, and a way that I'm really happy to say has really resonated with the audience and with some live audiences we had of early screenings of the show. So I'm always having to, everything that happens in the book, everything that is based on history or an invention of Philippa's, I have to filter all those things through, what are the semiotics of that? What am I constructing for the audience? What will the audience read from it? And making decisions that I think will make the best show.
Yeah, and is this a show that you had written entirely before you started shooting, or were you still going simultaneously? Like, I'm wondering if there are any changes that you made based on like how the actors were playing things, for example.
I mean, we had most of it written before we started filming. We had a fantastic lead time, so we were able to get 8 scripts all in some semblance of shape. Necessarily, they always go through 1,000 more incarnations and drafts. I'm trying to think if we did. I think I definitely wrote more for Michelle Fairley when I saw her playing of the character, and also she has such an ability to communicate just through the slightest expression passing over her face. So we knew that she could do a lot just with some quite subtle lines and some, you know, very small moments that she would be able to convey that. So yeah, we definitely made more of Margaret Beaufort once we'd cast Michelle. Other than that, I'm not sure. I mean, we were just so lucky. I mean, the cast that we have is the dream cast, and you know, that's rare to feel that you've got the absolute best cast, and also that they gel so well. Because I think often when you're casting, there is a sort of cherry picking of the best person for this and the best person for that, and then when you put them all together, sometimes you go, oh, actually, they sort of inhabit different universes, and sometimes there's one or more that, even though they're a great actor, they don't feel like they're part. And what was fantastic for us with The White Princess is that we felt the cast really worked together and are very much part of the same universe. So they're amazing, all of them.
Yeah, and your lead is up for a BAFTA now.
I'm sorry?
I said your lead, Jodie Comer, is up for a BAFTA
yes,
now.
quite right.
Yeah. So this one was produced more through Starz, even though the first one aired on Starz. That one was more of a BBC production. So can you tell me about what differences that makes?
Not masses of a difference, because I mean we knew what the first show was, we knew what we felt worked for the audience, we wanted to build on that, we wanted to correct and improve the things that we felt we could do more successfully. The main difference is in terms of the producing structure, because in the UK we don't have a showrunner system, and so writers are more like feature writers in America. And it's the producers who make most of the creative decisions about how to actually make the show. And obviously in the States, there's a showrunner system where writers and producers are the same people. So from my point of view, it was fantastic doing it in the American system, because it meant that I was the showrunner, and it meant that myself and Jamie Payne, who was the other exec producer and also our lead director, we were really able to drive a vision through, and we were both on The White Queen. So we had a very clear shared idea about what we wanted to do if we had the chance to go again. And we were able to really see that vision through in a way that I'm not sure we'd have been able to do in the British system, because there are so many other voices. So that was the main difference.
And as showrunner, what kind of decisions have you had to make for the Emmys?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry. I said, as showrunner, what kind of decisions have you made with regard to the Emmys?
You mean in terms of who is, which episodes we've put up for things?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, I think we feel that the whole team is award worthy. So it was really just a question of discussing with the different HODs which particular episode they felt best represented their work, and allowing them the free rein to make those decisions, I think. I don't think there's been much more than that.
Okay. I guess I was wondering kind of like more strategically, like with you having so many writers, you decide like you're only going to submit this episode versus this episode, and kind of the politics of that. But
I'm not really sure what the politics of it are. I take advice from Starz, because they're far better versed in this side of things than I am. I think that the main question that gets raised is just, do you want your show to compete with itself by submitting multiple episodes in each category, or do you want to select one episode that you feel is the strongest episode? So we discussed it, all the various execs discussed it, and we made a decision jointly, but I was very much led by them, because I felt they were in a better position to know than me.
Great. And what do you have coming up next?
I'm writing a movie for Jennifer Lawrence, which Ron Howard is directing, which is about Zelda Fitzgerald. So I'm still in the world of period, but this time 1920s New York, and her later life in the 1930s. I'm developing several other TV shows, which I probably can't name right now, in various different stages. And I've got a new movie commission, which will be announced in the next couple of weeks.
Very busy.
Yes.
Do you plan on returning to the world of Philippa, Gregory, and the Cousins' War?
You know, we're having conversations about it. I don't think there's a definite yes or no about that. So far, I mean, we're so proud of this show. We are immensely proud of it. And every time I say I might be done with it at the end of this one, and then you get to the end and you go, oh, there's so many more stories we can tell. And, you know, it's such a privilege to bring the stories of these women to the screen and to have such amazing parts for actresses apart from anything else. So there are ways we could move forward with the story. So we're discussing it, but we haven't yet quite settled on one way or the other. I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. We look forward to seeing the remaining episodes.
Great. Thank you.